Well, we just met each other, but I have a bit of a confession to make. Is it okay if I confide in you?
Absolutely.
I don't know what a smart city is. Can you define what a smart city is to you?
It's a brilliant question. A smart city is a city that inspires its citizens to participate in the place where they live. Not in an abstract way, but in getting involved. A smart city is a city that gives access to the things that make life easier. Smart city is a city that makes us smarter, because the city helps us to become more intelligent rather than the other way around. So a smart city is really the history of the development of the human mind.
All right, that sounds a little heavy. Okay, so can you give an example of something today that personifies to you what a smart city represents?
Well, I did many projects in Singapore, large-scale residential projects. Connectivity, how you get around the city, public transport, public spaces. The fact that the buildings I built have built-in iPads where you can communicate with the big data systems to know how much energy, where is it distributed, where do you want to go, who do you want to see, how do you want to get the transportation. So a smart city is a city which reacts to your desires. And the buildings, smart buildings, react to your desires. They're not any longer these sort of inanimate objects which you sort of enter a door and a window and look. It's not just pulling down the shade of your window. It's being able to be with a kind of a new organism which is responsive to your desires and needs.
So it knows your mood and knows you want the shade down at that moment.
More than that, buildings, you'll be able to talk to buildings in the near future. You'll be able to ask buildings to do things for you. You'll be able to communicate with your buildings as you would with a muse.
Right.
Absolutely.
So what do you want to say to your building?
Well, you want to say it when you're tired. That get nicer, get softer, get harder, give me something. I lost my glasses. Where are they?
Right. So muses can be temperamental.
Oh yes.
Yes, and cities can be temperamental. Singapore does not seem like. Everyone always brings up Singapore as an example for everything. But Singapore is not the real world. The real world is bigger. It has different political systems. It has different finances. Can you give us an example that's not Singapore of something that you've seen out there and you go, wow, that is the future of the interaction of a city and its people?
I don't think you can choose a single city and say that's the city of the future. Even if, in the reports, it's always, Zurich and Oslo. Always that sort of the best cities.
It's too easy.
It's too easy. I think smart cities are cities that continue to transform themselves. Look, I just came a couple of days ago from London. I was so impressed. I'm in London all the time. How radically the center of the city is being changed in big ways and small ways. Not just in beautifying buildings, but transport systems, transforming entire neighborhoods, transforming the infrastructure of London. That, to me, is very impressive. Here's an ancient city, a city that could have rested on its laurels, like Paris or other cities, Rome, but a city that continues to be competitive. Never mind Brexit and other things that are going politically. It's a city that is always in the market for the betterment of its citizens.
So in some ways, it's a mentality as much as an execution.
It's definitely a mentality. I think you have to be an adventurer. Cities have grown from creativity. I mean, we often forget, why did people come to the cities in the first place? They could have stayed on the farm. It was nice, trees, cows, green.
They came to trade.
They came to trade. They came to learn things, because by trading, they met people they would have never met before.
Right.
And the system just organically has transformed humanity and how we relate to the environment.
So we see there's some people coming in late now. They were probably stuck on the New York City subway. For real. Congratulations. The governor has placed you in charge of the MTA.
Thank you. I'd love to do that. It's about time.
All right. So what's the plan?
I think you have to be very bold. You have to transform a system that is used by millions of people. And New York has one of the best systems because you can get anywhere rapidly on public transport. That's what makes New York a sustainable city.
Right.
But the conditions are we are entering a 19th century world. Dark and dingy, and how ridiculous. This city should have the best transport system in the world. Of course it costs money, but it's where you put your money. And to make a better transport system is to make more money in the long run,
right.
to make a better city.
So you would then put huge glass atriums? Atria? I don't even, you probably know the plural of atrium. Put huge glass, thank you. Put huge glass atria.
It's not the glass that makes the difference. It's the safety, the ease of finding yourself, the ease of communicating, the ease of, and the beauty. By the way, let's not neglect beauty. When something is beautiful, you want to use it.
Right. So you would say, well, the problem with the MTA right now is that there's too much ridership.
Well, it's just the system has not really been updated in any radical way.
Right.
It's not enough to make, Second Avenue subway addition. You need to really look at the infrastructure and say, this city, that's the lifeline of the city.
Absolutely.
And if you look at a lifeline of the body, if you neglect it for a long enough time, you get clogs, you get cholesterol, you get the blood.
That's the F train, yes. That's the F train.
That's it.
So if you were designing a city from scratch today,
which I have,
what would be the components that make it smart?
Number one, public space. You can't have a good city if you just got nice streets and people live in nice houses. Mm-hmm. You have to have a place where people can meet. Nothing virtual will ever replace the fact that people see each other. And let's not forget that the interfacial communication has created the beauty of the human face. Monkeys don't have faces like people. Mm-hmm. It was not natural selection. It was the ability to look at people, identify, read the faces. And of course, that's public space. Public space is the core, to me, of a great city. Great cities have great public spaces.
Right. So Bryant Park, you'd say great public space.
How amazing. I came here, way earlier, sat down on one of those chairs and said, we live in the most beautiful city. When you can sit down under a tree, look at people running to work and meditate the way Plato would have done right next to the Ulysses. That's beautiful.
Yeah, that's very good. So what percentage, roughly speaking, sorry, I've got to talk specifics here. It's the Wall Street Journal. Roughly speaking, what percentage of a new city space should be a public space?
I don't think it's a matter of quantity here. It's a matter of quality. Mm-hmm. You can create, Tiananmen Square, and there's nobody on it. It doesn't matter how. You need a democratic process. You need a participatory process. You need people to mobilize themselves around the idea that there's a consensus how to do something, and you need to get good architects and good planners to do it.
Yes, of course.
Of course.
Of course. So any other elements that would be part of a smart city that you design from scratch?
Well, and I would say a smart city would not be simply based on statistics. That's one thing. Big data, my son is an astrophysicist, theoretical. Big data is the biggest thing in the world. We can learn, we can channel, we can move the data in ways that help us. But I think ultimately, what you need is human desire, human interest. Look, I don't have to give you lessons on Roman history, but you know that Rome didn't fall because of enemies. It fell because people lost interest, in the circus. They lost interest in the Colosseum. It was just, and how did they lose interest? Some obscure religion from the Middle East was coming, and people started getting other ideas in their heads. So let's not underestimate human interest. You need human interest to have a human city.
So for you, the spectacle of the Colosseum was a manifestation of shared experience.
It was shared experience, which at some point became less and less interesting, and people found it more interesting to gather together in a dark space with a cross.
Right.
I mean, there were a few of them, they were persecuted, but who would have known that such a delicate, weak thing would undermine the entire authority of all those great arches and all those buildings and all those great constructions? So let's not underestimate a word that is seldom used, the human spirit. Yeah, there is such a thing as human spirit. We don't know exactly how to define it, but we know it's there. It's our desire, it's our thought, and it's not inside, it's not outside, it's everywhere.
So isn't the thing undermining our shared experience the smartphone?
Oh, no. No.
Why not? If you walk on the street today, you probably find 60% of people looking at their phones walking down the street.
Sure. Because sometimes what you see animated on your screen makes you more animated than what you see on the street.
Right.
So yeah, so you got to make the streets compete with the screen.
Huh. So for you, it's not.
By the way, I don't see people. Sure, they take selfies also, but when you go to beautiful places, people are just enchanted. at what they're looking. They're not, reading the news. They're looking, wow, it's a fantastic world out there.
Right. So for you, the smartphone is not an undermining influence.
Not at all.
Shared experience.
Not at all. Look, we talk about virtual reality. It's not new. It's 2,500 years old. Plato's ideas, right? He said there's a sun. We see the sun. It's shining on us. But there's a bigger sun. We don't see that sun. That's the real sun that's giving us the sun. Virtual reality is basically people who've discovered or rediscovered the ideas of Plato.
Right.
But it's not enough, because you got to do something.
So would you design for virtual reality?
Of course, I love virtual reality.
So maybe that's where you should spend your time. Forget about the real world and spend time in the virtual world.
No. We do spend time in the when I read the dialogues of Plato, I spend time in the virtual world.
Yeah.
I used to be a professor. I spent a lot of time in the virtual world. I had enough of it. Now, there is such a thing as the real world, real presence. Let's not underestimate where we are. Most people think of time, history, big ideas, but where are we? What does the street look like? What are we looking at? Where are we going? Those are the things. And by the way, where are we going? The great German romantic philosopher Novalis said, where are we going? Where are we going? And he said, there's one answer. We're always going home. So what does that home look like? Mm-hmm. That's the city.
Okay, keep going.
So the city has to be. So the city has to really exceed our expectations. The city has to inspire us. The city has to remember for us the things that we've forgotten. And that's why they built great buildings in the past, to make us remember. And memory and time in buildings, in streets, in streetscape, in cityscape are why we have become civilized. We would not be what we are today if we didn't have that experience.
It's interesting. I do not see a lot of people looking at their phones right now, which is a sign that you are connecting with people. So kudos to you.
Thank you. But the truth is that participation is a human need. We're not born just to sort of lie down and leave. We are born to create a sphere of relationships. And without that sphere of relationships, nothing would ever work. We would become sick and pathological. So the more we can create spheres of relationship that connect us in different ways, you don't have to be connected the same way, the more we are really enjoying life, celebrating life.
So I have another planning exercise for you. Let's assume that 50% of the retail space across country and eventually the world will not be used over the next 10 to 15 years. Those stores are just gone. What should we do with the space that is vacant?
Well, there are two answers to these questions. First, the reason those stores are gone is because institutions make decisions which are, the best, the bottom line. They meet in a boardroom and they make it, which is completely disconnected with the people on the streets, people who live there. So they make a decision that means that on my street there will no longer be any stores. There'll be just a big, Dwayne Reed and a bank.
Right.
And all the small stores.
5 banks, probably.
Yeah. So let's say that's one place, the disconnection between institutional thinking and the reality of the city. Second of all, I think you have to think that a street is more valuable than almost anything you have. A good street, a street that you want to walk on. So there is a great danger if you're able to eliminate, through e-shopping, all retail. You get streets that are dystopian. You get streets where there's nothing
called
to
Bleecker
do.
Street right
now. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So how do you do it? I think it's about how the investment decisions are made. It's how to garner citizen support for decisions, and how to balance. You have to be able to balance the new technology with the needs of a street.
But people are voting. They're voting for electronic shopping, and they do not choose to spend their dollars at a retail store.
I agree, because when I look for a book, I cannot find it in Barnes & Nobles, but I can find it in an obscure site on my phone.
Right.
So yes, I can understand it. The truth is that we have to upgrade. I mean, this will lead to a natural transformation. People will come up with new ideas how to use those spaces.
Okay, well, that's why we're here, so give us a few.
Open up a good bookstore. Yeah. A bookstore that's specializing in 13th century medieval books.
Okay.
Fantastic. Wow. It'll have a huge success. Believe me, the wilder the idea, the more successful it will be.
Okay, keep going.
Chinese. A bookstore that, forget no bookstores. Ceramics, ceramics of the Tang era.
Okay.
Small. You don't need a lot of space because it's very expensive.
Yeah, okay.
No, seriously,
no.
I'm not joking. I think it's not a matter of filling gaps and reusing these spaces for other uses. It's thinking the history of the street. You know, when I lived in Berlin, and I lived there for many years, when I looked at the maps of the bombings of Berlin or of Dresden, you have nothing. Everything has been bombed. Everything is gone. There's one thing that remains. It's only about this big. It's the sidewalk, the line of the sidewalks. You can't erase. The street is the oldest thing we have in the world. And that's what made us go from one place to another, pave it, make it into a stability. So a city represents stability through its streets. I think we have to stop worrying about architecture and start worrying about the street.
Right.
How do the streets work? Who's walking on those streets? Look, I was, when I was in high school in New York, in the Bronx High School of Science, it was dangerous sometimes to walk in the evening on the street. They said, don't walk on the streets. You've got to get mugged. But that killed part of the idea of the Bronx. People moved out of the Grand Concourse. They went to, Co-op City. Killed one of those beautiful, avenues in the city. So through gossip, misinformation, and fear, you can undermine the stability of a street. And it's not just retail. Streets do much more than just sell things.
Right, but in New York City, there's a lot of retail, and a lot of it is vacant.
Well, look, you have to be able to connect to people. And look, there'll be new ideas for shops. Shops will become more desirable hothouses of dreams. You don't have to have a million objects. You just see one incredible object.
Right. Well, that's what Tesla's doing.
Yeah.
They don't have dealerships.
Yes.
They just have a place with one little.
Yes, and it'll be as exciting as going to a store and seeing 1,000, dull items lined up.
Okay. Maybe. Speaking of cars, driverless car it's not a matter of if, but simply a matter of when.
Yeah, tomorrow.
So you've talked in the past a good amount about how traffic is sort of destructive to a city. But to me, this seems like a great liberation is awaiting us, which is the reduction of both traffic and the sheer number of vehicles on the streets of cities.
Of course. Well, it's such a waste. One of the saddest, I invite you to do this. Go in the evening, wherever you live, let's say at 11 o'clock at night, and look at a street with empty parked cars. There's a melancholy to this. You see all this, steel and metal and the engines, the windows, and just all empty, just standing in rows.
Depreciating.
and it's kind of a indictment of the human spirit. Like, why? So we are in a Renaissance era now. Getting rid of the car will liberate us. We'll be able to have cities that are once again, I think, going to bring back the walking city, the encounter city, the city that is fun to be in, that is not really a city of mechanisms in front of us that consume a lot of energy and do very little for us.
Right.
Public transport will become more important.
So 100 years, we know that over the last 200 years, the geometry and physical plant of the cities have been totally upended by the automobile. 200 years from today, what's your best guess of what a modern city is sort of focused on?
This is my idea. Most people have been looking for a very long time, especially since the 18th century, at the city as a big infrastructure machine, the machine to live in, right? That's the 20th century. Big machine. What do you do with the machine? How do you plug it in, fix it, go into it? My idea is different. The city is a work of art. It's a work of art. We don't appreciate it, but it was created over a long period of time by creative people in all fields. Everybody contributed to it. They weren't just, any worker, anybody doing anything is contributed to this amazing work of art. So I would treat the city of the future, and I think that's how it's going to be treated, like a work of art. We won't do the old planning and zoning and all those things. We'll be able to intervene much more directly in sites, in buildings, in hovels, in the marginal spaces, in spaces that have been abandoned, forgotten. Think about it. If you look at the world of art, it's no longer just a painting on a wall, a piece of sculpture in a museum. It's everywhere. It's in performance itself. That's what the city will become. There's no doubt in my mind, because the city is a work of art. We just, we see it only when it's already disused. When we go to Venice, we see, oh my God, that's a work of art, but now it doesn't work anymore because it's just for tourists.
Right.
But I think every city that we love is a work of art. And New York Absolutely.
So how does that apply to the super cities that are all around us, whether it's Nairobi or Mexico City or Rio or?
They are works of art in different states of neglect, formation, dynamism. Of course, the favelas are very creative. We have a project in Sao Paulo, and you see how creative you can be with almost no means, but with the connectivity. Right. You can speak to others, you can mobilize, you can do things. So I see those cities also as future cities, definitely.
And in China, what's been your experience? You've done a number of projects.
Well, my first project that's I have to announce, because I did work in China.
Are we breaking news here?
No, I didn't. Oh. Yes, it is breaking news. Because I stayed away from China for a very simple reason. I grew up in Poland under communism, and I don't like anything with the ism at the end, But my wife tried to tell me, my wife tried to tell me that it's not really communism, it's capitalism. Okay, so I felt a little better.
Yeah.
I went there. But my first project, believe it or not, I was asked by a very, very ancient family in China to build a tombstone for a very important thinker of China. My first project is a tombstone in China. Wow.
Pretty cool.
My second project is a museum dedicated to industrialization of China in Wuhan, which is under construction.
Is that a scoop? No.
That's kind of a scoop because, because I never built anything else there. But anyway, I built it because it was related to democracy, related to Sun Yat-sen. Let's industrialize China. Let's get rid of the colonial powers. Let's build our own steelworks. Let's move China into the future. And that's actually something inspiring.
Right. So when you think about China and you think about the future, is the future more in China than it is here in the US?
The future is wherever there are smart people. The future is not where you have just numbers of phenomena of quantity. Of course, quantity helps you because, quantity is quantity, which is another quality. But in truth, I think the future is not, I agree, the future is not with the lazy. The future is not with the self-satisfied. The future isn't going to come from Harvard or Yale. Sorry, my daughter went there. It's going to come from somewhere, where somebody is struggling passionately to do something because they really want it. I don't say that people in Harvard don't do that. They do. But not all of them. Right.
So is America too self-satisfied and too lazy to embrace the future, at least as you see it?
No. I think America is changing rapidly. I think the elections, the politics, we see there's a tremendous change. And it's some people sort of define it as a kind of hysteria. Some people define it as political madness. But it's just a time of incredible positive change. That's how I see it. Absolutely.
There are not a lot of people who would expect you to say it's a time of positive change.
It is not, because in every positive change, things are disturbing. Things are going on that were not predictable. But it's look, to me, reality is exactly what you can't control. What you can't control is not real. It's an illusion. The real is the uncontrollable aspect, and that's what you have to follow. What are the things we cannot control? That's the real thing.
So if you were designing a building to help bring together a divided country like the U.S., the polls show, and I think the sentiment shows, it is a divided country.
Yeah.
Say, sir, you were given a commission, bridge that divide. Look, how would you think about that?
I'm working on affordable housing. I've built plenty of incredible luxury projects all around the world. I think, why can't we, for a very low per square foot, create beautiful, high-density housing? And I'm working on it. It's a serious project. A lot of people tried it. Right. They didn't succeed for many reasons, but I think the time is ripe for creating, and I think that's one of the reasons cities need it, because cities don't want to become divided as ghettos of the rich, ghettos of the poor, places that are artificial. You want to have the diversity. The diversity is what brings culture together. You don't want to have people from Kentucky, where I lived, thinking that they are not part of New York, and vice versa. People in New York would think, what, you lived in Kentucky?
But
yes, I did.
But that is the case.
Well,
so you can build something up here in the Bronx or in Queens or wherever, but that has nothing to do with the divide that is breaking out across this country, which is cities like this, the coasts, and the interior of the U.S. So how do you bridge that divide?
Well, you have to look. There's a city in the United States that did it, Pittsburgh. It was a city just like Detroit, failing. Everything was, polluted waters, all that stuff, and suddenly the political authorities, people mobilize themselves not to, wring their hands and say, we failed, we're moving out, we're going, somewhere else. They say, we're going to clean the water, we're going to reuse the buildings, we're going to bring high-tech industries. We're smart people. That's a very good example of something incredibly important that has happened that shows that all these abandoned industrial towns can have a future.
Right. You've built museums, you've built a number of sort of public monuments, public spaces. Is there anything that catches your mind about a space that can bridge the divide between Michigan and Manhattan?
Well, I think anything in architecture that does not neglect memory. We have a so-called collective memory, something that we share in a deep way. If you can touch upon that nerve of that memory, you can open up a new future. If you forget about it, you'll just deal with the upper levels of that pyramid. But on the lower levels, you'll have a kind of a darkness. So I'm a believer that you have to bring memorable experiences that people can share. They can be shared around a baseball game.
Right.
Why can't they be shared around, bigger, more aspiring projects?
Well, that obviously brings us to the Ground Zero 9/11 Memorial plan design of which you were a part. As you go down there today, I don't know how often you spend time
I live there and I work there.
So now that you see it living and breathing from conception to reality, how would you reflect on what it became, and did it fill your dreams? Is it different from?
No, I'm so lucky. When I look at my first drawings and I look, as I walk through a site, it's exactly what I drew. Let's not forget, a master plan is like, I used to be a musician, professional musician. A master plan is like writing a score. You got to write a score, it's got to be perfect geometrically, perfect acoustically. It can't have approximations. It's got to be exact. But you have to give it over to others, and you have to also give them a range of interpretability. Otherwise, you've got mechanical music. You've got to give them a range of freedom in playing those notes. And you, as a conductor of such a master plan, are not facing the public. Your back is to the public. You're not the first violin. You're not the tuba. You're not the flute. You're not the cello. But it just shows that if you bring consensus, and that was my idea, I'm a believer in democracy. I don't think that democracy is second to anything. We take it for granted. If you believe that you can talk to people who disagree, and I did. The investors were of a different mind, the families of the victims, the governors were of a different mind, the mayor was a different, the MTA, the PATH. If you can bring them together around the table and say, we have a shared interest here. That's how that site is now an engine for development of all of Lower Manhattan. It's right. 200,000 people moved downtown. And
when you go there and you sit and you have your meditative Platonic session there.
No, it's just a Starbucks.
Just a Starbucks, okay. What is the thing that pops out to you? It's like, yes, that worked. That thing worked.
Well, what comes to my mind, I took a very radical decision. I turned half of the site into public space. 16 acres, not a lot of space. I said 8 acres, public space. Put the buildings as far away from the public space as possible on the periphery of the site. Make them so that they are buildable, so they are not monsters and mega structures and require a lot of money. They are conventional buildings built in a kind of symbolic way. Create not only the sense of memory with the footprints and with the waterfalls, but go all the way down to bedrock, the slurry wall. Get a sense that you're sharing an experience that is both historical, but also opens new perspectives for New York, new beauty. And by the way, this is how I thought. My mother and my father, they were immigrants, and they worked in the sweatshops. My mother in the garment industry, my father is a printer on Stone Street. So I said to myself, my parents would never be in those beautiful buildings, right? Because they wouldn't be there. They're working people. Where would they be? They'd be in the subways. They'd be in the PATH trains. They'd be on the streets of New York running, trying to feed their families.
Schlepping.
What do I give them? That's what I thought. What do I give regular New Yorkers who are not going to be in those buildings? You give them space. Public space, which is shaped in dramatic ways.
Is there anything about it where you say, I wish I could just edit that and change that, and it didn't work out, that one part of it didn't work out as I...
Not a single thing. Never. So, because when you plan, it's not an experiment. You would be a fool to do experimental planning.
Right.
You have to base it on facts, you have to base it on historical ground, and you have to be very bold to convince others that it's right.
But I'd say the one difference between planning and actual reality is that you don't know how people are going to behave when they're actually in the space.
You do. If you provide nice places, if there is nice vistas, if you don't cover, if the big buildings are not at Wall Street, but they're spread around so that you can see the beautiful horizon of New York, if you have easy access between, culture, west side, east side, you know that people will love it. You know that people will gravitate to it, and it's not by coincidence. 20 million people or something every year come. They're attracted. Nobody tells them to come there.
Right.
So I think creation of that space in a neighborhood that used to have dark alleys. At 5 o'clock, it was pretty dim on Wall Street. It wasn't interesting. Now is a booming, kids, families, there's schools being built, performing arts centers being built as a completion of my plan. Tower number 2 is not yet done. But I think it just shows that real thinking and planning is not something that is going to wind up in an archive of a museum. It's a real vehicle for improving the city. And I think that's what I learned. And of course, there's no, you got to be lucky. I was also lucky. Let's face it. Such a plan could have been demoted, thrown out. But I was lucky that I had governors, 4, mayors, 3, who, have 6 heads of port authority or something, who sort of saw the virtue of continuing on that way. And look, it's not going to be done in 5 minutes. It takes a lot of time. 10 million square feet of office space, millions of square feet. It's one of the largest projects in the world. If you really take the ground zero, I often compare it, it's a downtown of a regular American city. It's, downtown of Denver is just within those 16 acres. Yeah. So it's building a city. So
we're going to take questions from the audience in just a moment. Before we do that, just a few last questions. Today is the summer solstice. The idea of the solstice obviously informed your design for Ground Zero. Is there anything that the solstice inspires you about, or you think about, or you can give people today as they go about their day, going back to work? That's a beautiful question. Look, we are part of nature. We dominate nature because we are. And I just opened a building that I designed in Durham in UK for fundamental physics, which some of the greatest scientists are working on, cosmic ideas, cosmic explosions, what's going to happen to us in 5 billion light years. But I was told by Lord Martin Rees, who's the royal astronomer, one of the great collaborators of modern science, who told me, Mr. Libeskind, we're entering the era of the post-human, because now we have the possibility of transforming our DNA. We are able to transform ourselves, so we will not really be what you used to. It's evolution. We're part of evolution. So that's what I would say about solstice. When we look at the sun rising, we realize it doesn't rise. But for us, it will always rise. Right. But we know after Copernicus, the sun is not rising. So how do we modify, how do we adjust our ancient perspectives that we are in the center of the world, we are the culmination of design, we are the pinnacle of God. And how do we understand, no, we are in an evolutionary system. We have to be smart enough, not just to survive, but to steer it in a way that will not make us into those robots. It sounds like you're saying we have to submit to the robots. No, I say no. We will be. Look, we have no choice. We already know how good it is to know, genetically. Why is there such an interest in genetics today? Because we want to know. Of course, we all come from Africa. We know that only 8,000 years ago, we were all black. Did you know that? I mean, I didn't know. I'm working on a project in Kenya with Richard Leakey, the great anthropologist. He told me, I said, 80,000. No, he said 8,000 years ago. I said, are you sure? Yeah, there was a professor at Oxford. He says, yeah, it's 8,000. He's right. Not a lie. So I think knowledge will bring people together much more than wars and weapons and empires. Okay, last question before we go to the audience. And I hate to be so reductive as this, but you have such a polymath approach to the world that just sitting here it's cool and it's inspiring. So I hate to be reductive in this way, but if there's one tip or approach you can give to people here to help them be more creative in their lives and more receptive to creativity in them or around them, what would it be? Look at the space around you. Be practical. Look at where you live, where you are, your street, and think about how you can intervene it creatively. Everybody's creative. I always say, in the future, there won't be any architects.
Believe me, there won't be any architects. It's an outdated feel. Like, used to be, you have to go to art school to be an artist, right? But it's not true anymore. Anybody can pick up, a computer, can pick up, most of the artists that are famous today have never gone to art school. Believe me, everybody's going to be an architect, or there won't be any architecture.
Okay, questions for Daniel Libeskind.
Following up on the smart evolution, if you just comment on what you perceive the smart evolution of two locations in this country, the Grand Concourse in the Bronx and Detroit.
Well, I'm a great believer in the Bronx because I grew up in the Bronx as an immigrant. And I love the Bronx. I've never understood, actually, how the politics works that has not brought out. When Edgar Allan Poe was writing, he said, I could live anywhere in New York, but I choose the Bronx because it's the most beautiful place to live. Now, do we need a better authority than the greatest American poet to know that this is the best place to live? No. So I think it needs political mobilization. It needs people to want to do things. I mean, unless people participate in demanding of their elected officials certain things, nothing will happen. So people have to mobilize, and I believe in activism. You have to, participatory democracy. That's how our country started. We have to say, yeah, we want to improve it. We want to live there. We don't want this to be a negative neighborhood. And I think that's what changed many neighborhoods. First of all, many artists changed neighborhoods. Artists moved to cheap neighborhoods because they can't afford, they're poor, and then suddenly those neighborhoods have gentrified, and suddenly the city sort of glows. Where is the West Beth? Who knows what West Beth is? West Beth was a project. When I was in school at Cooper Union, Richard Meyer built West Beth. It was housing for artists, affordable housing for artists in a very attractive neighborhood. Where is it today? For thousands of artists, are living there. Where is the West Beth of today? Why is the mayor, the governor, not putting more West Beths in New York so we can not have artists just going out of the city, gentrifying the area, and then moving out, but have them really in the cities as part of the community?
Okay. Over there, please.
Thank you. So you say cities do not want to become ghettos of the rich or ghettos of the poor. How does New York hold on to its economic prosperity, which is so important, without becoming a ghetto of the rich?
Well, it's a matter of planning. It's a matter of saying, when you look at all the cranes in Manhattan, how many of them are affordable housing? 1 out of the 1,000? Maybe none. So you have to say something is wrong here. There is plenty of possibility of high-density housing, integrated. You don't want a city the way I see London now, the center of London. All the people who serve you, who work in the center of London, don't live in the center of London. Center of London is relatively empty. It's a little like Monte Carlo, if you've been. The most expensive real estate, completely dark because nobody lives there. It's some sort of an investment of very, very wealthy people. So I am against the fact that New York is becoming ghettoized into, you cannot live in Manhattan, you cannot live. Well, it's a matter of decisions. It's not a matter of saying, give us 2% of affordable housing in a building. It's got to be a bigger idea than that.
Other questions?
How do you see the role of technology in a smart city?
It's the key role. I think technology is the driving mechanism, the driving tool. We have to know how to use the tool. It's like a pencil, but it's a million pencils connected to a super mind that are able to figure out things that we can hardly fathom. But a pencil has never created a city. A human being has created it. So there's got to be a humanistic culture behind the drivers of the technology who understand that the liberal arts, and what are the liberal arts? Geometry, poetry, the stars, tragedy, music. Liberal arts means you're free. There's freedom. That's why I don't believe that authoritarian regimes can create great cities. They can create mega constructions, but are they going to create, a Galileo or an Einstein or a, Jackson Pollock? No.
Please.
You mentioned Bryant Park as a wonderful example of cities, New York. You also must remember Bryant Park. You could not walk to Bryant Park.
Yeah. I'm old enough to remember that.
What changed?
I think, I have to say, and Giuliani came to power, and he was a tough guy, and I'm not a Republican, I like what he did. He asserted civic order, clean up places, don't have crime on the street, arrest people who are, because the reason New York is so good and exceeds London and Paris is security. New York is a secure city. So if you don't have security, you don't have anything. If you lose security, the game is completely lost. So I do believe in strong governments that are able to deal with crime. Who are, my wife went to the New School of Social Research back in the 60s. I used to have to go on the train to pick her up at night because every train had a policeman on it. There were, murders on subways. So somebody had to step in and say, this is not acceptable. We're not going to live in a city where people are afraid, a young woman is afraid to go, on a subway to the Bronx. It's a matter of order, and order is, it's a balance. You can overdo it and then fall into something bad, or underdo it and neglect the city.
So would you say, as someone who thinks in symbols, black-clothed policemen with machine guns at Penn Station, is that a symbol of security or a symbol of fear?
I don't know. I'm not an expert in this, but there were different ways to provide security. This is not a new question. All cities in history have gone through the periods of insecurity. The medieval walls. Why did they build walls in cities? I was working on a city called Palmanova in Italy. It was built as a military fortification. Beautiful, the most beautiful city. It's a star shape, complex star shape. By the time they finished the city, the science of ballistics has changed, and it was useless. But it's a beautiful form. So that's the lesson. The beautiful form will exceed the weaponry of the day.
Okay. Other questions? Got a few more? Yeah, please.
So we talked about cities as organisms. Have you thought through how those network with other cities and the value of connecting a New York to a Singapore and what kind of synergies exist and how that'll happen in the future?
It's a brilliant point, actually, because I believe that it's the era of cities. It's not the era of nations. It really, the competition is not between nations. It's not between, United States and Germany and Russia and China. Not at all. That's what's in the papers. It's a competition of cities. Where is the city that you want to be? Is it London? Is it Beijing? Is it New York? Is it, Singapore? And I think that's the connection. That those cities are interconnected already because, first of all, they speak English. Second of all, they have great airports. Third of all, it's easy to do business in them. They've got law. They don't cheat you. So there is a commonality in the great cities, and I think cities that I'm working in, let's say Milan, big project, City Life in Milan, transforming the city, in the center of the city, completely new sense of scale, new sense of urban space, new green space. Cities are redoing themselves. Warsaw, I built the tallest residential tower in the middle of a city that, right next to the oppressive Stalin Palace I saw as a kid. The city's changing. Cities are changing and doing bold things, and they're interconnected. Believe me, anybody who's buying an apartment in Warsaw knows that they were looking at an apartment in New York or maybe in London, but they want to be in Warsaw.
Maybe one last question. In the red shirt back there, please.
Why, excuse me, I'm just curious, this is the city that made you and has shaped you. Why haven't you built more here? And is it a matter of your work or the city?
That's a great question. My wife asks me this every day.
Yeah, is it us or is it you?
I'm not a person who runs to get jobs. When people come to me and say, do you want to build housing for the elderly in New York, low cost? I said yes, and I'm doing that. If somebody comes to me, or if I compete for something I really believe in, I would do it. But look, let's not overemphasize that you should build where you live. We live everywhere. We live in the global world. And building a building in London or Berlin might have as much impact on the building on where you live as anything else. Sure, if there's a developer here who wants to hire me, I'm ready.
There might be someone here, actually. Okay. Well, thank you for joining us for this solstice discussion.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Thank you.